Hello, the digital journey community, and welcome back to another episode. We're extremely excited to be diving in to the first episode of the year and continuing to bring you real experiences from real operators to help you identify how technology can take your business to the next level. And as always, I have my co-host and right-hand man, Brandon Schaefer, here to help me. Hey, Brandon, how's it going
Hey,
this week?
hey, man, it's going good, man. I'm excited to be here tonight, as usual. You do a phenomenal job at setting this up on getting guests on and everything else like that. So I continue to be more impressed and more impressed and more impressed. And tonight, our guest, James, is another phenomenal person. So looking forward to getting into the content and like always, just sitting back, listening, learning, and then sharing some of my experiences as well. So.
Definitely. I think, tonight's topic focused on how cloud and remote work, right, have impacted ecosystems is really one that all of us can feel or, feel relevant. And it's really something we've all experienced, right, whether we notice it or not. So we're extremely excited to dive in. So let's not wait any longer. Let's bring in our featured guest for this week, James Barrood. James, it's so nice to have you on. Thanks for taking the time.
Glad to be here, folks.
Awesome. So before we go too much into, cloud, remote work, ecosystems, how the whole world is changing, and how it's impacting businesses, I'd love for the audience, to get a better picture of yourself, James, and kind of where your background is. So maybe we can start with Innovation Plus and, what you're doing there and how that whole journey started.
Sure. So Innovation Plus is sort of a culmination of 25 years sort of supporting startup and tech ecosystems. So I started doing this type of work when I worked at the Rothman Institute of Entrepreneurship and Innovation at Fairleigh Dickinson University. So I started there as an assistant director, and then I ran it as an executive director for over 10 years. So I was there a total of 17 years helping not only students, but entrepreneurs in the community start and grow their businesses. So that was really impactful for me and impactful for the community. And then after that, I was recruited to lead the New Jersey Tech Council, which is a large trade association focused on tech companies mostly, but others as well, anything that's tech enabled. And that was a really great experience for over 5 years. Helped revitalize that organization and strengthen it, where we had over 1,000 members by the time I left 5 years later. And then since then, I've been doing a lot of the same work, helping entrepreneurs, helping companies raise money, helping larger companies be innovative, helping institutions, higher ed institutions, connect with the community and build and have stronger entrepreneurship programs and stronger connections to the startup community. I've done that particularly during the pandemic. And of course, all along the way, helping entrepreneurs on a personal level be more successful. So that brought me to Innovation Plus, which is, again, an umbrella community that's been created really to nurture and support not only entrepreneurs who are starting new businesses, but innovators in larger corporations and in the nonprofit world. So it's been a really fun time building out this community, again, from a vast network, which I've created over the past 25 years. And it's just really nice to be able to have impact, particularly during this difficult time during the pandemic.
Definitely, and I mean, a lot of the communities very similar, right? I think those communities is what fosters a lot of innovation and growth, for a lot of these early stage companies that used to need to go out and get fundraising, just to put pen to paper or get started on their idea. And now, you have talent that you can work with and people are feel like are just a lot more open. Do you feel like since your earlier days with the other communities and then the New Jersey Tech Council that a lot of the digital ecosystems and the way that entrepreneurs are communicating has changed significantly?
Well, I think, anything, the hallmarks of a good startup ecosystem is the willingness to help each other, right? Clearly, the pandemic has made people a bit more generous, right? We're all in this together. We're all trying to help each other out. So that's been sort of the upshot of a terrible, horrific pandemic that we're in right now. Is that people, particularly in the early months, year or so, there was so much of an outpouring of support trying to help one another, right? And that was really wonderful to sort of be part of and actually take advantage of, because I know we did everything by Zoom. We still do, and just getting people to provide insights and to provide help for others in the community was really heartwarming to watch and sort of help spread.
Definitely. No, I couldn't agree more. I think, fortunately, a lot of us came together, whether it's because we're all home and bored and wanted to talk to each other, or, obviously there was a lot of other pressing challenges that came with it. And a lot of experts, even ourselves, we were working with a lot of new clients and communities and, just really spreading our digital connections, if you will. And it's been a really interesting time. And, at the end of the day, obviously there's a lot of communities out there, right? Nowadays, communities could be a Facebook group, right? A LinkedIn group, and then obviously, proper ecosystems, if we want to title it that. So when it comes to the communities that you've helped develop, James, right, from the New York Tech Council and now Innovation Plus, they're truly ecosystems, right? On top of obviously the community mantra that's pushed within, all the members, are driven and based around the same values to help one another. But at the end of the day, it's a full living and breathing ecosystem of all these different people. So I'm just curious, with all these different ecosystems that exist, what would you say defines like a successful ecosystem of, a successful community where all these relationships are being fostered and it's not just, one person going around and asking everybody for favors?
That's right. No, that's a really important question, because a lot of people don't know what an ecosystem is, even though it's pretty simple. Most people hear that word and they think of maybe a biological ecosystem,
Definitely.
or the rainforest, right? But similarly, an ecosystem has several parts, right? And I like to sort of call out 5 stakeholders to an ecosystem, right? You have the entrepreneurs, right? Those are the sort of the real special part of people starting and launching businesses, right? And then you have investors, right? And those investors are funding businesses, right? And then you have higher education, right? From community colleges to universities that are supplying new entrepreneurs, right? And providing resources for entrepreneurs to help launch their business. Of course, you also have nonprofit organizations like the ones I mentioned before, a lot of entrepreneurship support organizations. And then there are, of course, is government, right? And I want to mention one other that some people forget, but they help lubricate the whole system. Is these trusted advisors, right? Accountants, lawyers, bankers, right? Those are important. Those are important pieces as well. And so when you have all of those 5 or 6 stakeholders working in an optimal way, everyone's trying to get to the same goal, right? And that's sort of a community where it's encouraged, it's easy, and there's help along the way. So anyone who's starting a business could be helped along the way. And I should have said corporates. If I didn't, I should have said corporates as well. So those are large companies. They're part of this innovation ecosystem, right? From companies who are starting, right, to large companies who are partnering or even gobbling up smaller companies, right, to get that innovation, right? And then the universities obviously supplying the talent, right? And then you have government, which are making, hopefully, lower taxes for all of us, but also doing some programs which help create incentives for investors to invest, for entrepreneurs to start, for entrepreneurs to stay in the community, and to also give back. So the other lubricant is the generosity of people in general, of course, everyone and those 5 or 6 stakeholders, but primarily when an entrepreneur exits, right, sells his company, doesn't have to be a unicorn, could be $1 million or 10 million or 100 million. Anyway, that entrepreneur then has a sort of an obligation, let's hope, to the community to give back, right? And that could be mentorship, that could be investing in other companies, that could be starting a new company. So we see this, all variations of this formula, of this virtuous cycle, where someone starts a company, exits, invests in other companies, and starts another one again. And then, they pay taxes on that money too, right? When they exit the company, that helps the government supply additional sort of programs that support the ecosystem. Or more and more these days, it's really the government needs to provide a great quality of life. As we'll talk about later, when you could work anywhere, people are going to live where there's a great quality of life. And that's become front and center going forward. I hope that gives you a sense for it. Happy to follow up with any questions you have.
Yeah, no, I think that it really paints the picture, right? And that's the challenging part of the ecosystems, right? Or any community as a whole, because your first hardest part, right, is getting a good amount of each stakeholder, right? So that you have that balance of relationships, insights, and those that are in the beginning of their journey, right? And those that are in the middle and more towards the end, so that that whole life cycle can, pollinate one another, if you will. So I'm curious through your experiences, James, right, with obviously all the communities that we've discussed that you've taken part in creating, what is one of the more challenging stakeholders to get involved into that process, right? Because I can imagine, obviously, entrepreneurs, right, when we first get started, we're looking for anyone and anything and any dollar, right? So they're always a little bit more proactive. When it comes to the other stakeholders like investors, the institutions, governments, nonprofits, or corporations, which one of those, did you see was a challenge to get them in when you were working at some of the other communities? And do you still see that being a challenge today, or has things shifted a bit?
Well, I guess it depends, right? Well, investors are always looking for the next unicorn, right? So getting them involved, depending on who they are and what level of investment they make, will depend on their engagement. If they're a later stage company, only invest 10 million bucks in larger companies, they're not going to be really that concerned about the younger, smaller startups, right? So that's an interesting dilemma, but it's also been fixed a little bit because more investors have flowed into the New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia area over the past 10 years. So it was formerly Silicon Valley, which had 80% of all VC money, and now it's getting split much more, well, let's say much more equitably. And that's a great thing. So investors, that's kind of been solved. There's so much money out there right now, and there's investors everywhere. And of course, with Zoom, they can be anywhere. So that's one part that was, I guess, tricky. Government has always been challenging, right? They're short-term focused, unfortunately. And historically, I don't want to name names, but it goes up and down with the administration, right? Whether it's local, whether it's state or federal, right? They like to talk. Everyone likes to talk about supporting it, but the actual policies vary, right? But I think over time, most governments are starting to get it, that it's important to support this entrepreneurship ecosystem. And so that's an interesting dilemma, or reality, I should say. Nonprofits have been consistent all the way through. I should say higher ed has come so far. When I started at Fairleigh Dickinson, we were one of only a couple dozen entrepreneurship centers. Now there are 3,000 or 4,000 across the country. So every college has an entrepreneurship center, essentially. And that's a real great thing, right? Because you have so many more potential entrepreneurs who can get educated and could start their own business or do a side hustle or a freelance gig, right? So that's really a great development. So historically, universities have been sort of difficult bureaucracies for entrepreneurs to navigate and for the community to navigate if they wanted to be entrepreneurial with the university. Universities have gotten better. They're still bubbling bureaucracies in general. So that's a challenge of the ecosystem. So I think I gave you a few there. I hope that gives you a sense for some of the challenges and some of the changes over time.
Definitely. No, it certainly has, and I can imagine, how, like you said, I think schools is a great example. It's funny now, a lot of schools all have at least a very strong business program now or an entrepreneurship program, and they're starting to make sure, some level of business mindset, right, and the basics of business is underlined in most of their curriculum, if not all of them, whether you're in an entrepreneurial track or not, right? Which I think is extremely beneficial for all the stakeholders that are involved, because no matter where that talent goes, if it's the nonprofit sector, right, for profit, a major corporation, or he's an innovator, he's coming with all those same principles and mindset that they also use to leverage their organizations. And Brandon, I know obviously you and I are in a lot of groups, so I'm just curious, how have you seen some of the shift? I know we're in, Vistage and some manufacturing groups and other startup communities as well, where, we like to play a mentor and advisory role and help get the younger stages further and the bigger ones, growing faster, right? So I'm curious, where have you kind of seen a shift in the last, 5 years ago, just based up today, without COVID being the impact? How have you seen the communities you're in change?
I see. Well, first, what I'm hearing from James is I kind of he talks about ecosystems, and I kind of define that as social capital, and I think that ties perfectly into the ecosystems as well. So, it's so much about relationships today, and I'm not talking about like the old time sales type relationships and stuff like that. But with funding, it's about the warm handoff. It's about, hey, you ought to talk to this person. It's about the subtle suggestions and the connections of good people that I know, connecting them with you, Brian, or you connecting them with me, Brian, or me connecting them with James, and James connecting them with me. That's the social capital. That's the ecosystem of success today that James is talking about. And at least that's what I'm hearing from it. And it's, even from 6 months ago, I'm sending out some emails today and different stuff like that. They're coming back. They're getting bounced. Like nothing is the same. Everything, people are gone. My best connection inside of a business is no longer there. There's 10 new people, right? So I need to sell wider. I need to sell deeper. I need to sell stronger, right? So what I did 5 years ago isn't working today. What I need to have is that ecosystem that James is talking about. Again, I'm going back to that ecosystem, that social capital of, whose kids do I know of parents in my local neighborhood that may have a mother or father that work in education. I need somebody in education, so they might want to go into education, right? Again, I'm talking about using my local community to harvest new people for business opportunities. So everything's up in the air, man. It's if I continue to do business like I was 5 years ago, I wouldn't be sitting here today talking to you. This is building social capital. We're putting ourselves out there. We don't need to be here. We can be watching Netflix. We can be watching anything. We can be doing anything we can. The fact is, the three of us put a priority to this because we find value in communication. So really glad to have James. I'm kind of like listening intently, as I always do, but I'm really honing in because James is kind of giving us a behind the scenes look at how things actually run. And I usually look at the front door and say, oh, that door's so pretty, but I never actually open up the door and go in. So tonight's kind of giving us a behind the scenes look into how these entrepreneurship how these programs actually run and how things actually work. And I think we're going to get into how we can get in front of these people. So I'll be quiet and we can keep on boogieing.
Well, you bring up a really good point, Brandon, about sort of the velocity of change, right? Of people moving jobs. right?
No.
And just struggling to not only find the right person to sell to or to service in a company, or the right people to hire who you can retain for a decent amount of time. Um, so there's a so it's a I don't want to digress too much, but I think it's uh, really important to figure out a solution, because people are in a dilemma here, connecting with people who are moving on, right? Or who's so busy. And I think it's just a little tip here. Everyone is everyone is on LinkedIn, right? So engagement, showing love on LinkedIn is really important, because regardless of whether they're in their job now or somewhere else, if you show them love on LinkedIn, right, and interact, that will benefit you or your company or your salespeople down the road, right? The other thing that's really evident, we'll mention this later, is that everyone is working on a side hustle or a passion project, right? This pandemic has sort of accelerated that reality. So people don't want to wait, right? So if you or I or Brian could take advantage of that, and again, show interest in their side hustles, whatever they are, if you can find out what they are, or their passions, that will build stronger relationships. At the end of the day, as you know, relationships are everything. And so that's sort of a realization that came to me this week, actually, because of the reality of the dilemma we're all in, because everyone is moving, um, super busy, distracted, but also doing a side project. So
Yeah.
the only way to sort of combat that or solve for it is to do some of the things I just mentioned. Maybe
Yeah,
that makes sense.
in some cases, just so everybody knows, you need to pay to get involved, and that is okay. It is investing in yourself. If there is a group, if there's some type of organization that's going to provide you with FaceTime, do it. I mean, it's again, it's an investment in yourself. I know there's big organizations like Score. I did a lot of mentoring for Score, which we're all very familiar with. Um, but other opportunities come about, and it's the same thing in business too. So if I know that my main prospect that I'm going after sits courtside of the Sixers, I'm from Philadelphia, so if they sit courtside of the Sixers, I may have to buy courtside tickets too, so that I can bump into him or her at the Cadillac Club at halftime. That's an investment in myself to get FaceTime. Don't be afraid to invest time and money into your primary hustle, your side hustle, whatever it is, to get time. Just hang around. This is the only thing that I would say is you get in touch with somebody like James that's trusted, that's influential, that's authoritative, and you ask him what is the best thing to do. If you just go on and Google, that's probably not the best idea, because you're going to get a bunch of ads and everything else. This is why we do this show, to put you in touch with people all over the country that are more than willing to provide you with a path, a direction, a suggestion on where you want to go. But you have to reach out, right? You have to reach out. If you don't reach out, you're never going to get it. So
Definitely. No, I love that. I think, both points that you guys made around the social capital and how things are changing with side hustles. I think, a way that I like to try to change it and describe it a little bit is it seems like the whole world's changed from this transactional environment, right? Where I get something from you because you need it. Then I do this, I go work for that company just so I can pay my mortgage and retire at this age, right? Like these transactional predefined paths. And now it seems like a lot more things, even if people are looking inward at themselves, right? We're leading much more with empathy, and you can't really have expectations. You have to take the time to get to know people, right? Foster those connections, understand what's really and truly important to them before you can even take your shot, right? The days of just blasting 10,000 emails and getting 100 replies are over because people don't value that transactional level anymore. Would you agree with that, James? Do you see that that's the direction that it's going more and more?
100%. And I just want to, build on what Brandon said about trusted advisors or trusted people. it's so much harder to do. You can't do cold calls anymore. You can't even call anyone anymore, right? That's the reality. So you need a referral. I mean, you can go through LinkedIn, right? But if the best thing is to get a referral or an intro into someone. That might be the only way to get into, some companies and the best opportunities. And so, folks like you guys, and folks like me, serve a really even more important purpose, as we live in this super fast paced, super distracted, Zoom reality, right? The prospect of bumping into people at events is lower now, right? More people are not going out to events.
Yeah.
More people can try to do substitute events online, and they would be smart to do that, right? Because if you can get good at networking online, that is,
The
that's
tool of the
gold.
next decade. Yeah, definitely. Awesome. No, and I think it's, before I know we're diving right into tech, and I'm excited to dive into how things are changing, but we'll give the audience a little bit of an example of that I think most of the people are familiar with, right? So, and James, I think you mentioned it earlier, right? Silicon Valley, it's no secret that it was one of the first, right, if not the first, best innovation ecosystem that existed in the early days of the technology boom. Right. And for a lot of people that don't know, right, Silicon Valley is obviously out in California, a little south of San Fran. And what had happened at the time is a lot of the major companies were already out there, right? Google, Yahoo, Apple, etc., and maybe Napster at the time, and some of the old school bigger companies. And then from there, right, how that whole community formed, at least to my understanding, James, right, was a lot of those corporations obviously brought all their employees there. Then after that, any employees that were outside of Silicon Valley, but in California, in the surrounding area, right, they would bus all those employees into that area every day. And then they built, what could pretty much be compared to college campuses, nowadays, right? Built the sense of your non-traditional corporation where people wanted to stay there, right? They wanted to foster relationships and always be innovating. So I'm curious, as we've dove into what an ecosystem is, right? Obviously, Silicon Valley had all the components that you had mentioned. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on, what you think Silicon Valley did really well, and elements of what they've done that have obviously translated themselves into other communities, and how things are done. And, some things that they didn't do that well that are an opportunity as we move more into, the digital age of communities, and just new areas of groups.
Right. Well, let me go way back into history before the period that you mentioned. I mean, Silicon Valley started in the 50s, really, right? When William Shockley, an engineer from Bell Labs from New Jersey, left over some disagreement about the transistor and moved back to California, and then decided to start a company called, Shockley, Semiconductors. Right. And then that led into Fairfield Semiconductors, which led into folks starting Intel. Right. So, I mean, I don't want to get into the details, but that's how it really started. So it's really a transplant from here, from New Jersey and from Bell Labs. And, those inventions of the transistors and silicon chips, plus they, the engagement with Stanford University, right? I mentioned higher ed, right? They're really open to this and really supportive. And of course, the growth of venture capital, right? First, Sand Hill Road, right? All these venture VC companies really helped, the Silicon Valley area. And then it just became a laid back feeling of California, right? The sort of culture, importantly, of giving back, right? And it's okay to fail, right? And those people start new companies, and it's sort of a badge of honor, right? So that type of culture. So it's those things. Again, entrepreneurs, right? And then you had the big corporates, right? You had HP at the time, you had Apple, others like that would engage, right? And of course, the government was supportive as well, and universities. Trusted advisors, as I said, nonprofits as well. So that's how it just built and built and built, and it got so much momentum. It was really a first mover advantage, and then the snowball effect of all these unicorns, right, just helped go back into this ecosystem, which is the envy of the world, right? Now that's changing, right? I mean, it's still the envy of the world, but there's so many other options these days. People have tried to copy different aspects of Silicon Valley and sort of make it their own wherever they are around the world. And many regions and many hubs have been very successful and have made great headway in that effort. And so that's where we are today. But it's been a 50-year journey to get Silicon Valley to where it is now.
Definitely. No, and I think that's a, perfect element of obviously where Silicon Valley's done everything right. And now, like you said, right, James, at least a lot of the other areas that I've seen growing, right, Miami is a very large, booming technology center trying to attract a lot of talent down there. Texas is very similar, right, between Houston, Austin, and Dallas. I mean, they all have great initiatives around bringing entrepreneurs down there and allowing them to travel those three cities, in a pretty affordable life to continue to build relationships and grow their business. And obviously, like we were alluding to earlier, it's no secret that the progression of technology certainly helps, right, with the cohesion of these communities, helping people connect digitally, but also fostering those relationships to make them meet, in person where they know connection can be much deeper. So I'm curious, of course, we've been talking around the great resignation, right? How many people are leaving their jobs? How many people have side hustles? And then on top of all that, we have the progression of how much technology has grown, right? And cloud technology has enabled us to create new experiences in a fraction of the time it would have taken us, 10 years ago, whether it's new platforms or communities or products, right? But it's also had some downsides, right? Of where, yes, we can connect easier, but we're kind of taking the, that soft touch and the human connection that comes into all those interpersonal connections. So to kind of start us off on where things are going before we dive too much on the stakeholders, James, I'm just curious what you're seeing is, the biggest shift or the biggest impact for communities when it comes to, remote work itself and where technology has gone.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's really changed the game for everyone from entrepreneurs to employers to talent, right? And I think, that's going to be the real challenge and opportunity, right? The opportunity is, you can find talent anywhere, right? And it might not be as expensive. Um, the challenge is, of course, that you have to pay more sometimes, right? And to retain those employees, particularly online, you have to treat them really well, right? And that means you have to become a better manager, right? And be more empathetic and be more flexible and try to build a culture online, which is challenging, to say the least. So those are just some of the, issues around remote work. Just to kick off this conversation.
Yeah.
Happy to answer follow-up questions.
No, certainly. And I think, like you're saying, I think it's kind of a myth or a common, misnomer of the more digital we go, the less, connected or interpersonal you need to be, right? It's almost, since we're digital, we've lost our other five senses, outside of being able to smell and talk. We've lost the other three that all do come into human connectivity and interactions, right? And now you need to be a very clear communicator, right? Or you're trying to send texts all day in Skype chats or Slack channels, and you're sending people in circles, or you're not, really taking the time to get to know your new employees. You're just onboarding them and putting them into a chat. So I think, this kind of leads in a little bit to how it's impacting entrepreneurs, specifically, right, James? And with those challenges, I'm just curious from your end, where do you think, let's say the entrepreneur of 10 years ago that was starting a company versus the entrepreneur of today, what are some of the new skills that they need to develop, to be successful in this new digital age and digital communities and workforces?
Sure. So things in many ways, Brian, things are a lot easier for entrepreneurs and a lot cheaper, right? You could, software as a service, you can get up and running and have a $10 million business in a week, just because you can latch onto Amazon AWS or other services very easily, right? So of course, and then so that's one thing. The cost has been reduced by a factor of 100. It's incredible and so exciting, right? Talent, right? Uh, 10 years ago, you'd probably have maybe one of 10 people in your company might be offsite, or two. Right now, it's probably 9 out of 9, 8 out of 9, 8 or 9 are going to be remote. Right, so that's a reality. Now that's good because you can pull talent from anywhere. Right, but you have to get really good at assessing talent. Right, communicating. Right, I mean that's really important. You got to pitch someone to get them to come onto your company. You have to be really good, particularly online, to really convey that, right? Especially when you're not going to be in person, you have to get really thoughtful about it and try to sort of build that trust, right? That's really, really important, and that takes practice and education to get to that point. And that's before you even running the company is a whole nother exercise and challenge, right? So getting the talent, retaining them, and managing, right? Managing has to be all these channels you just mentioned. It's so overwhelming, right? If you burn out your employees, you're in trouble, right?
Definitely. No,
So there's that balance of, these days are figuring out maybe 1 or 2 days a week in person, or maybe it's 1 or 2 days a month in person, just to try to build the culture. That's the most important thing. Just try to keep people together, or keep people on task, on mission. So basically digital soft skills are going to be the most important skills, frankly, going forward.
definitely. No, and I couldn't agree more. Obviously, for our team, we're around, 70-30 remote and in person, right, and on site. And it has been a challenge. The early days of COVID, communications channels change. You don't have the way to store documents. All those soft communication workflows you had, get shattered when everything needs to be standardized because no one's there just to turn across the desk and ask the guy for a file, right? And I'm curious, Brandon, on your side, right? Have things changed for you a bit? Obviously, we say since the pandemic started, but we're about almost 2 years in now. So obviously, it's been a long time for that shift to take place. Has a lot changed with your talent, on your side, especially around the services you provide?
Oh man, it's constantly changing. I wake up this morning, it's changed. There is so much competition out there currently for top-notch talent. If you are talented, if you can work like a machine, if you do not need to be babysat, if you just go full in any direction, in any career, in any market segment, they will find a spot for you and you will reap the rewards of making money. You may not make a lot of money in your first job because it's kind of like the actual testing ground. You're gonna test you're going to test what you know. There's a lot of people that are book smart, that have studied it, but haven't put the hands on the computer, in our world, and actually done the work. And what it says in the book always isn't the way that it is. You constantly, James alluded to this before, it's okay to fail. Fail. Do it. Test it. Just like as soon as we're done with this call, I'm going to spend a half hour learning more about what James was talking about, right? The ecosystem, the eternal, because I'm going to dig in because I want to get better at it. I'm not going to drop this call and then just roll. Like take a little seed and just, water that thing. And that means constantly learning, getting around people. Winners hang out with winners, right? Losers don't hang out with winners because it breaks the congruency. So hang out with winners, man. Get around people that are doing what you want to do. If it's HVAC, if it's plumbing, hang around plumbers, hang around HVAC. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is, just get around people that are doing what you want to do and that have had some success. Not somebody selling you an idea of success, but are actually, walking it and getting their hands dirty in it and everything else like that. You'll find your way, man. It's not going to be easy. But I'll just say this one last thing too, is that in terms of competition, I deal with a lot of big corporate companies, and their IT divisions are not within the U.S., right? 70 or 80%. I think we're going to touch on immigrants here shortly too. Hopefully we can still touch into that. But a lot of the competition today is not your normal next door neighbor here that you grew up with in school. You have competition from around the world, and this ecosystem, this online ecosystem, has just exploded growth. So if you think you're only competing against our little nugget here in the United States, which we are a very small portion, right? You're competing against the whole world. So you have to be on your game 24/7. You have to be totally bought into what you believe in. So
Definitely. No, I love that, Brand. I think you made, a really significant point speaking about the talent, right? I mean, a lot of people can come out of college with great skills. Obviously, if you're a software engineer, you need to be able to code at some level, right? If you're a sales guy, you need to understand the basic sales process, buyer's journey. There's all those foundational aspects that you get from school, right? But I don't know about you guys, but for us, one of the biggest things that we've been looking at, how do people learn after college, right? So when they're working for us, are they going to be self-motivated? Are they going to be self-reliant, right? We don't expect to know the answer to every question, but are you going to turn to a group chat, right, and ask us a very simple question right away? Or will you try to Google it first, right, and try to solve that problem for yourself? And I think an interesting part around both, the entrepreneurs hiring talent, right, corporations hiring talent, at the end of the day, they're going to be looking for how do these people fit in. And as more and more information becomes available on the internet, right, there's pretty much a YouTube video for everything at this point. Then you have Udemy's, which are like online colleges for any type of specialty skill you'd like to learn, right? I think a lot of corporations are going to be focusing on how to provide their employees with those opportunities, but ensuring that they're also hiring people that would take advantage of them and focus on like what I like to call open source education or community education versus corporation education, where you have formal trainings, right, webinars and things like that internally. At least that's been a major emphasis for us. And I think, like you said, Brandon, it's a huge identifier in a way that somebody could stand out in the early days of their position, right? Finding the nuances within their process, asking themselves strong questions, but before they go to somebody else for an answer, taking the time to see if they can solve it, and then go to somebody with that information and work together more collaboratively. Just curious, James, if you think you're seeing the same as well, especially with, all the different stakeholders that you work with.
No, absolutely. You're right on target there. I mean, it's really up to the employee, and they can. It's up to the employee that has to be motivated, right? The problem is the company can provide all these options. If the employee is not motivated, that's the problem. And so trying to keep them motivated and keep them lifelong learner, make them lifelong learners or want to keep learning, whether it's at their own pace, right? With the the resources of the company, that's great, or they can get them elsewhere. But they really have to be, you have to nurture that motivation, right? That's really important, and try to get them into that sort of that method, right? Or that rhythm of always learning and always trying to achieve more and learn more and help the company, help your colleagues, help the company. So I think it's tricky. It has to come from both sides, but getting the buy-in is the trick.
So James, I have a quick question for you. Is and I know there's no solid answer for this, but just in your experience, so here's a real life circumstance. A 22-year-old graduates with excellent grades from Temple University, and they get a job with KPMG. It's 100% remote. How does a company onboard this employee, build culture, build all that type of stuff, and then and I'm just asking these kind of not as a deep question and stuff like that, but it's just something for everybody to think about, right? Because we most likely all have kids or are going to have kids or whatever, or have a cousin, aunts, uncles that has kids. How does one 22-year-old that works for KPMG make a name for themselves all online. So his business culture is the issue for the company, right? It's tough to do. And then how does one make a name for themselves when they're going? It's difficult. And I'm not really posing these questions to you. I'm just kind of wanted to throw these thoughts out for people to think about, is that it's not easy. And this is when the ecosystem, first of all, to get a job, you're probably going to need an ecosystem, which James has been mentioning. You're probably going to need somebody to say, hey, I know this, my aunt's, uncle's, brother's, dog's nephew, whatever. He or she's a great person. Just take a look at him. It happens all the time. It's a warm handoff in HR departments. Yes, you go through the ATS system. Yes, you do resumes. Yes, but it just gives you that inside influence. Has a parent work there? Has a brother? Has a sister? It's the same way that colleges do some of the entries. So it's difficult. But James, if you could say, is there anything that a company can do just from your knowledge and working in this industry for years and years and years to help build business culture? I mean, it has to be almost impossible to do online. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's a huge challenge. I feel sorry for any of these kids who are just going remote first, right? And that's the reality. It's just, we already have our networks, right? We've already been in person and developed them, right? We're at an advantage with these young people. While they do have digital soft skills, or should have, they need to be nurtured. They need to be motivated to build those networks online. Maybe a virtual coffee break here and there, but they need to sort of work twice as hard. Maybe not twice as hard because everything's virtual. But imagine if they were in person, they'd have to get an appointment. They'd have to walk over there. They'd have to, and there was already, before the pandemic, there was already an issue with young people not having interpersonal skills, right? They're all in their own digital cocoons most of their lives, whether it's gaming or whatever. They don't know how to conduct themselves in public, in networking or interacting. They're already super awkward. And now this is sort of, has held them back as well. So for companies, you have to force people to come, whether it's one day a week or one day a month, and just sort of, get them up to speed, try to have them meet as many people as possible, or just do creative things as well. There's different formulas that people are testing now. But it's incumbent on both, right? The company needs to make an effort. But again, without the motivation from the professional, new entry, then nothing's going to be as productive, right? But it's also important for retention, right? They want to be happy. They want to meet, their social network within their company. That's really important. I mean, historically, a lot of people have met their mates at companies, right? That percentage is gone down to maybe it's going to go down to 0 or maybe 5% or less than 5%. So that's weird too, and that's going to be it's problematic. I think, and for us humans, I think it's a challenge. We are social beings, and we should be amongst one another. Being there full time is probably never going to happen again. The only way to do it is to sort of think thoughtfully and creatively, and to try to make up for that loss of engagement. And just to really do amazing types of in-person events and engagements to make up for it.
Yeah. And I've seen some companies use LMS, so that's short for learning management systems, and gamification. And if I'm right, I think Brian's company can actually do this. This is in no means a shameless plug for Brian, but it is a perfect opportunity. The gamification. So I have seen some companies just in listening to what you were saying, James, is kind of rung a couple bells, and that's why I wanted to bring that question up. Is they're making people take classes just on what they believe in, efficacy, diversity and inclusion, like all these different things. So I don't know if it's subliminal or purpose, everything on purpose, I'd imagine, in a big company. But so there's a lot of different ways to do it. And I know Brian was working on one project with the gamification project in the education market, which was really, really cool. But anyway, keep going, Brian.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's, what we all touched on, the talent's highly accessible, right? But they'll need to be motivated, just like any relationship, right? If only one person's doing all the talking or committing to all the experiences or taking responsibility, then it won't be successful at the end. And then just touching on retention a little bit, because I think we just started talking there, right? I think that's a really big challenge for a lot of companies, right? Of course, it depends on the type of labor that you're trying to hire, right? So for technology companies, our largest challenge with retention is ensuring that the engineers are actually truly enjoying the project that they're working on, right? Outside of entry level engineers, thousands of them are extremely, extremely bright, right? All capable of developing the same project that you might be offering to them. But now they're starting to choose things that just interest them, right? They don't want to be on a project at Deloitte for a Fortune 100 company for 7 years by just doing one small portion of that project every day, right? They might want to go work for a startup, learn a whole ton of new skills, start using new tools and things that aren't, as traditional to implement in a traditional business or a very successful one. So I think that's just a good thing to touch on. I like that you mentioned the LMSs, Brandon. A lot of our clients, whether it's in the educational space, within the vendor space, they're wholesalers or they're just manufacturers, right? And for manufacturing companies, I mean, for the majority of them, at least in the tri-state area, over 50% of their workers right now are temporary workers, right? So the main challenge that they're facing is, one, how do we upskill them, right, and train them fast enough so that they actually know what to do in a short period of time? And then two, how do you retain them, right? Because certain jobs, those skills can be easily transferable. So just focusing on the retention part, I know culture is certainly an aspect of that, right? If we're close to those around us and feel involved, we'll be less likely to leave. But I'll pose the question to both of you. Whoever wants to go first. What do you think are, more of the aspects that can lead to more retention outside of just, trying to meet them in person or, see what their skills are? How do you think we try to drive more retention now where there are so many digital communications?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's about flexibility, right? I mean, you have to understand their needs, their personal needs, each and every one of them, right? They may be taking care of their kids or parents, so they need flexibility, and just empathizing with them is the sort of is a differential advantage, right? If you can do that, as opposed to another prospective employer, right, or another opportunity that they may be considering, right? If you can, that's harder to replicate if you build something special, right? It's not easy. It's totally not easy. And LMS can help, right, if they're continuing to learn. But at the end of the day, they want to spend more time with their family. They want to do something amazing. Those are hard things to, sometimes accomplish when they're just doing a bite-sized piece of a project or something that's really boring. It's really hard. And maybe, one of the solutions to that is to, have them pay them for their time to do a volunteer project, right? Or pro bono project, or get involved with another association or nonprofit, right? Try to, try to build out that for them. Give them that opportunity, give them the nudge, recommend them for an advisory board, right? Here, you're really thinking about them, right? You really care about them. You care about, them being well-rounded, right? And getting out of their bubble or their cubicle, or their computer screen. And that could go a long way to keeping them and making them more productive. And, most importantly, having them get their friends to join down the road.
Definitely. No, I love that. I think it is such a crucial part, right? Showing them that you know more about them than the responsibilities you hired them to do, right? And I think, again, kind of going from where the world used to just be very transactional, right? You could have 1,000 employees in a building, 30 of them all have the same job titles and have never even spoken to each other, even though they're all there, right? And the managers wouldn't care about your personal life if you weren't in your chair by 9, right? They'd ask you why you're late. Just all these different transactionary type of behavioral, right, of how humans were communicating. And then yes, you'd make your friends at work, right, and hang out with them, but that's the same as any other ecosystem that you move into. You don't kind of push yourselves to learn more and gain different opinions. So I think we covered a lot from the talent side of corporations. Obviously, right, James, like we were talking about earlier, the other kind of role that corporations play in these ecosystems, right, is they do play a major role in funding or fostering innovation, right? Whether they're investing that internally and have an R&D department, right, like you said, with maybe volunteer projects or things that they're trying to solve specific challenges, or they're taking that money and they're buying smaller startups or reinvesting into communities where they could see right benefits for them in the future. So I'm assuming, obviously a lot of that investment has changed from invest if you're a California company, right, and the companies in Silicon Valley that are right nearby to now you're looking regionally, nationally and maybe globally. So is that really where you see the shift of how companies are trying to invest into these ecosystems, or are they still staying very close to, what is still within reach physically?
Yeah, it's to be determined, right? It's a little early. I think they're taking advantage of being able to secure talent anywhere, right? But they also have, some engagement due to incentives, right? Government incentives to stay and support their community. They should have a stakeholder, do it out of the goodness of their hearts, frankly. But at the end of the day, the bean counters will say, what's the best thing to do? Where's the best thing to relocate? Is it the best thing to just close up the office, right, and be virtual? I mean, these are impactful times, and a lot of communities are going to be in pain because of this reality, and that really stinks. But it's a reality that the ecosystems across the country and across the world have to recognize that the same sort of rules don't apply, or the same assumptions certainly don't apply.
Yeah, Brian, just real quick, in terms of investments, James has alluded to this with the ecosystem. If I'm on the West Coast and James is on the East Coast, and I know James and I've trusted him for years. He's never brought me a bad apple. And James called me up and said, "Hey, Brandon, you ought to look at this company." I would look at it, right? And when I peel back deals, big deals for big companies, when I peel back, how did that business come in? We can go to a Google ad or something else like that. Is very, very rare. What it comes down to is when we peel back layer 1 and layer 2, then layer 3, it is somebody gave somebody else the social influence or like, hey, why don't you, I talked about this earlier, why don't you talk to James? Why don't you talk to Brian? And that opens up the conversation to huge deals. That's why we're talking about ecosystem tonight, and then I'll go back to that one question real quick too, Brian. I know we're running short on time here, but just in terms of what employees want with where they're, and James said the same thing, freedom, right? They want the freedom. So if I'm a business owner or if I'm a Fortune 500 company and I work in the IT department or I run the IT department, have a entrepreneur day on how you think you can improve the processes in the office. And you'll see what happens is that somebody's going to come with a bright idea. Like, hey, where did you, I think we can do it this way. Hey, where did you learn that? Why do you say that? And the person's going to say, because I've already built it. And you're going to have your golden gem right there, So give people the opportunity to present what they're doing. It used to be in IT departments where you would be a level 1 tech and you would answer the phone and do password resets and stuff like that and printer driver stuff all day long. That was all you knew. Could you imagine doing that today? Today, you need to turn the computer on. You need to plug it in. You need to restore it. You need to go here. You need to go there. You need to do everything. So give people the freedom. And then the social good, which James mentioned too, give people the opportunity to give back to their local community. Right? Hey, you want to go paint fences? You want to go pick up trash on the side of the street? You want to have a high school student come in here? It used to be come in there, right? You want to have is there something that you want to do with a college student? Maybe a Zoom mentoring session or something. All types of stuff like that. So it's freedom, social good, and that's kind of where I'm at with that stuff.
Perfect. No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think obviously, the further away that we move apart, meaning out from physical locations, right, the harder and deeper we have to fight to come together, which is just ironic, obviously within it. But it is where the world is going, right? And yes, there's no friction to connect, but there is friction to build valuable connections. I think a lot more than there ever was, because unfortunately, James, maybe 7 years ago on LinkedIn, I could reach out and I'd be one of 5, 10 people in his in mailbox. Right now, I'm probably one of 250 to 500 on a daily basis. So even if you are that right person, but you're trying to get through all the other noise, it can be a lot more difficult now, right? And I think we covered a lot of how the ecosystems are shifting. James, obviously offline, we talked a little bit around how talent is shifting, right? And of course, you can hire globally, right? It's no secret. A lot of entrepreneurs use tools like Upwork, right? Fiverr, and some of these platforms that help aggregate and make sure you can find the right person for the skill that you might not know exactly what you need, right, from the individual that you're hiring. But I think another, proponent of that is looking at the larger companies, those that are still directly hiring employees. They're not so much looking for a contractor or a consultant, which is most often on those platforms. And how a lot of the role in the government plays, right, around the immigration side of things. And how do we attract a lot of talent here, right? Because there are a lot of great stories of companies that the founders were in other countries, then they come to the US for college, right, to get their masters. Then they try to stay and get funding, and we send them home and they go build the next Amazon, right? There's a handful of those stories, especially within India and the Asian Pacific countries overall, right? Because that is a major group of students that value American education. So James, when it comes to the immigration and how we attract skilled workers, specialty workers, not normal immigration policy, I'm just curious, what role do you see the government playing in that, and do you feel like we need to make a shift, to really be bringing in more skilled and specialized workers?
Absolutely. We cannot get enough, especially right now. And this is the new challenge for us, frankly. And now there was some good news actually as of today about the number of H-1B visas. The delays are down, and they're accepting more quickly. So that's really good. But we have a talent shortage. We already know that immigrants are generally more entrepreneurial and more innovative. They make the people around them smarter. I mean, and the problem is now they have other options. So this country has been based on immigration and smart immigrants, and of course tech, right? The resurgence of tech to being so powerful and so successful is largely due to entrepreneurs from other countries and the talent from other countries. So it's a real issue, a real challenge, because now, as I said, they have other options. They can go to school here, they can go to school in their regions and stay in their regions and build their companies. So this is increasingly, we can't do enough to get as many immigrants here as possible. We have a labor shortage, not only in tech, but everywhere. It's a crisis that we've sort of created, and we just have to do more to open up the doors, and that will make this country stronger. And I was just researching a little bit about Silicon Valley, and the two folks who created the transistor, which is the basis of all things, right? There's 16 trillion, whatever it is, transistors. They run everything on this planet related to automation, mechanization, or computing. It was an Egyptian immigrant and a South Korean immigrant that made the transistor. I didn't know that. And I've sort of been in this sphere. I know a lot about tech history, but I didn't know that, and I felt ashamed that I didn't know that. But it's just these unknown immigrants, the basis of the technological present and future, because they invented something 50 years ago or 60 years ago. So anyway, it's hard you cannot belabor this point enough. You can also look to the vaccines. Again, in my TED Talk, I mentioned this, that immigrants were a really important part of getting those vaccines and the treatments created so quickly and have helped save millions of lives. So it is a dilemma, and the government, and not only the government, I should say businesses and we the people, right, need to embrace and cherish immigrants at every step of the way, because that will retain them, as we're talking about retention, whether it's in your company or in your community or in your town. The more we can do to make them feel at home and embrace them, the better it is for everyone.
Definitely. I mean, I couldn't agree more. My business partner's first generation here. His family came over, and I'm not sure 100%. I don't want to attest it to mindset or the way that we were raised and things like that. But I've learned a tremendous amount from just the way he views the world. Through how his dad views the world, and then I go and hang out with his whole family. And if anybody has any Indian friends or families, that's a good amount of people. And their stories and just the whole way they look at the world is much different, right? They're very empathetic. They're very good at understanding people. And it seems most of the time it's because they seek to understand first, right? So I'm not putting anything against the American schools or our culture, but it's always a question that comes up. So I'm curious to get your guys' opinion on it. Why do you think, obviously the majority of students getting their masters, right, at least in computer science, right, a lot of them are immigrants, and then some of the top entrepreneurs in technology come out of those degrees, right, and are also immigrants. So I'm curious, do you think it's more of like a mindset of wanting to have the American dream or create this life here, or is it a foundational difference of how they're raised, compared to how our environments form us here in the U.S. specifically?
Well, I'm happy to start that off. I think it's a couple of things that you just mentioned, right? It's some people would say it's self-selected, right? People who immigrate want a better life, right? And are really motivated to succeed, right? So that's number one. And I think that ranges from all socioeconomic, from the laborer on the fields to the tech CEOs, frankly. I just think they're all more motivated because they left mostly for economic opportunity, or secondarily to get away from horrific or horrible societies or governments or situations. And so they're motivated. And then I guess combined with that is the culture, that the parents really want them to succeed. Again, it's sort of the same thing. They want to take advantage of this opportunity. They want them to succeed in different cultures. But I think pretty much all cultures want their kids to succeed and put a greater emphasis on education, because they know how hard it was to immigrate, right? And so, of course, we all hear the stereotypes, and those are not untrue, where the Asian parents are, really want their kids to succeed and to support them. And frankly, that's overall a good thing, that they're very supportive parents and they want them to do well in school and be successful. So that's how I see it. I agree with you. I'm just sort of explaining it a little more, the reality of the situation. And I think this country is better for it. And, I would go further, and I've spoken about this before, is that the reality is the second generations and the third generations become Americanized and become sort of, I don't want to say it, but complacent or not as motivated. And I fall into that category, frankly, right? So my dad is the son of an immigrant, and he worked his tail off. I, did not work as hard as my father. I know, even though I think I worked hard, I did not work as hard as my father. Okay, so maybe it's because he was a part of 11 kids and had to, bust his butt to compete with those kids to get a scrap of food at the dinner table to work, in their grocery store or whatever. So that's right, and that's why I say the influx of new immigrants is important, because they bring that ethic, right? That work ethic. I hate to say it, but It's just a reality of the immigration process. You leave a country to get a better life, you're going to work your ass off.
Yep. Couldn't agree more. I definitely could not agree more. And I think, like you were saying, I always forget the exact quote, but it's like great times create weak men, right? And bad times create strong men. And it's a cycle that happens, right, with anybody. Because if you wake up every day and your family's extremely successful already and you grew up that way your whole entire life, you can have a great job, make great money, but just the effort it took to get there is not going to be the same. And therefore, it may diminish where you don't keep trying to grow, you just sustain where you're currently at. So I think it's just a great point to touch on. I think the other, main part, obviously outside of work ethic, is just the diversity in experiences, right? The diversity in mindset and the diversity that comes into play in your organization, right? It's very evident, at least, especially in the technology world and in other worlds as well. Just in the technology world, you can have a lot more, abstract challenges or problems that you're trying to solve, and you quickly see how everybody's different lens is looking at the same problem compared to three of you looking at it from the same exact lens. And I think that is one of the biggest benefits of not just immigration but diversity of any workforce is everybody is a combination of their experiences, and you may never know what experiences they had to get them there, but you'll see it in their work and as you collaborate with them. And usually it ends up with you having an entire new perspective, and between your two you might form a whole new avenue of how you're looking at a problem, where if you weren't with that person you would have never have changed your perspective to see it from that angle.
100% right, Brian. And I should have mentioned that diversity, there's so much data that reflects that diverse teams create the best innovations. It's as simple as that. And all the way back through history, you could look at Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison's muckers were from all different backgrounds. So, it's repeated time and time again. And it's just another important reason to, include as many immigrants as we could.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, I think that's great. I think we covered everything, we were looking to. James, I can't thank you enough for coming on. It's really great to dive into the ecosystems. I think we'll have to check in another year or so as we see, how much continues to change. It feels like every month is a year in the world we're in right now. So it was an absolute pleasure to have you on. I'd like just to give you a second to let everybody know where to, find Innovation Plus, where to connect with you, because we'd love to make sure our community can outreach. I'm sure a bunch of people will have some questions and be looking to connect.
Sure. Just find me on LinkedIn. There's only one James Barrood. So find me there, connect with me, and I'll make sure I get you involved with the community. And I look forward to, helping and collaborating going forward.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, James. Thank you, Brandon, as always. It's another great episode, first one of the year, and can't wait to reconnect soon. Have a great night.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much.
Thanks, folks.